to be talking about working with excessively angry, aggressive, and defiant kids. And before we got going, we wanted to just take a minute to introduce ourselves and just kind of share a little bit of our professional experiences with you. So my name is Kara Batchelor. I am the MHP at Home of the Innocents, and I have been there for just a little over a year. But prior to that, I worked in Child Protective Services in Wisconsin for 2 years. I worked in a mental health hospital as a clinical therapist for about 2.5, and then also have 7 years of experience in working with alternative high school students as a school social worker.
And I am Kelsey Dennis. I am also a mental health practitioner for JCPS with the state agency schools. Prior to being in this position, I worked for Child Protective Services for the state of Kentucky, and then transitioned into being a therapist for families involved in foster care, and primarily children who were in the foster care system, as well as for a community-based program who worked with exclusively with families who have an open CPS case. So Kara and I have lots of experience with this population, and we're hoping that we can give you some information that, you may not have, or if you do, some tips that you may not have thought to use with this population. So to start off with, we wanted to talk a little bit about the DSM diagnostic criteria for oppositional defiant disorder. The reason why we wanted to bring this up is because the DSM is the standard classification of mental health disorders used by mental health professionals across the U.S. So all of the mental health professionals within the country are utilizing this same diagnostic criteria to ensure that we're giving correct diagnoses, because obviously that translates into ensuring the correct treatment and possibly the correct medication if we're working in conjunction with a psychiatrist and that's decided it's needed. And also to avoid over-diagnosing certain mental health disorders that may be more prone to that. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of stigma and negative connotations associated with a lot of mental health diagnoses, and oppositional defiant disorder is one of them. If you think about if you were to receive a student into your classroom and before even meeting them, you're told they have oppositional defiant disorder, it's not going to put the best picture in your head. So we're just wanting to avoid, giving that diagnosis to a child who doesn't need it. All right. And the actual criteria is a pattern of angry and irritable mood, argumentative and defiant behavior, lasting at least 6 months, as evidenced by at least 4 symptoms from the following categories that we'll look at in the next slide, and exhibited during interaction with at least one individual who is not a sibling. And we really wanted to point out here, this has to be going on for at least 6 months. This isn't something that, happens every once in a while or just started happening. We have to see it happening consistently for this period of time to meet the diagnostic criteria. It also needs at least 4 of these symptoms we're going to go through next, and it has to happen with at least one individual outside of being a sibling, because it's pretty normal for kids to be defiant and oppositional toward their siblings. So these indicators, the different categories we're talking about where we need at least 4 of the symptoms, are within angry and irritable mood, where a child may, or just a person, may often lose their temper, may often be touchy or easily annoyed, may often be angry and resentful. We also have the argumentative and defiant behavior category, where a person may often argue with authority figures, or in our case with these kiddos and adolescents, just with adults in general. We're often actively defying or refusing to comply with requests from authority figures or with rules, often deliberately annoying others, often blaming others for his or her mistakes or misbehaviors. And then we see the category of vindictiveness, where, this isn't going to be a kiddo who easily lets things go. They're going to have that mentality of getting even if they feel like they've been wrong in some way. This leads us into kind of looking at, what are normal developmental choices as opposed to oppositional defiant disorder. So we wanted to bring this up because it is normal at times for kids and adolescents to experience periods of oppositional and defiant behavior. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's something deeper going on. They may just have something pop up that they need a little bit of extra guidance through at that point in time. And we wanted to highlight just a really brief overview of brain development right here because it's important in looking at this development. So our brain actually, develops from the back forward. So we're looking at brainstem develops first with all of our survival mechanisms, and then we kind of go forward until we get to the frontal lobe, which is the last part of the brain to fully develop. And that doesn't happen until we're, around our mid-20s. And the frontal lobe is where we have the ability to think logically, make rational decisions, and to behave in a way that is conducive to achieving long-term goals. So we like to bring that up just to kind of highlight that it's not that kids can't behave in ways that are conducive to long-term goals or fit in with societal norms or, do what we need them to do, but they might need a little bit more help getting there. We can't have the same expectations over them that we would an adult. And outside of that, ODD is going to include a frequent pattern of being angry, irritable, defiant, and vindictive, like we talked about before. And, just highlighting again, this is a frequent pattern. This isn't something that's every once in a while. It's not something that, maybe kiddos had a bad day and they're behaving this way. It's frequent over the course of 6 months. Youth struggling with ODD typically don't see a problem with their behavior and are going to instead shift the blame onto others and not really be willing to take responsibility for the behaviors they're exhibiting. And behaviors indicating ODD will lead to a significant disruption in the youth's overall ability to function. So this could be, at home, at school, if we're talking about an adult, maybe at work, but really we're going to see it mostly at school because that's where we interact with the kiddos. We wanted to talk a little bit about trauma in this presentation. It's really important as an organization, and it's also important to understand when we're dealing with defiance as a primary issue in behavior. So the 4 types of trauma response are fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Most people are really familiar with fight and flight, and sometimes even freeze, but not a lot of people have heard about the fawn type of behavior. And we wanted to talk about these because it's a really good way to look at, the need behind the behavior and to give a framework for those behavioral intervention plans that we talk about. The BIPs are really looking at what is a student trying to avoid, what are they trying to communicate, what are they trying to obtain. And this gives us some framework there on what is going on behind this defiant behavior generally. So with fight response, we're going to see more of that aggressive, in-your-face behavior, physical and verbal aggression, being really argumentative. And this is stemming from the belief that power and control is going to create safety for that student. The flight response, we see, a need for perfection, and this can come in, literally running away from something to avoid a situation where they feel like they can't create perfection, so it's safer to not do it at all. Being obsessive compulsive about getting everything right. And also some of that hyperactivity can occur here. And like I kind of mentioned, this stems from the belief that perfection creates safety here. The freeze response can look like, a child who sleeps all the time, or it can also be dissociation. So this is where, the student is physically with you, but kind of mentally they're somewhere else. They might have a glazed look over their face, or just, again, look like they're not quite with you. And this is going to stem from the belief that solitude creates safety. The last one, fawning, is where we will see more of the codependent behaviors. A child who is really overly eager to please, and a really strong lack of boundaries overall. And this is stemming from the belief that keeping others happy creates safety. And obviously in the population we're talking about today, we're mostly going to see the fight response, but sometimes this defiance can be from the flight response as well. And the reason why that's important to point out is because there's 2 different beliefs there that the need for safety is stemming from. So we may, address those slightly differently if we notice that it's fight versus flight or vice versa. And I also just wanted to point out quickly that anxiety attacks in children and adolescents can actually manifest as aggression. So that panic attack may not look like what we're typically used to seeing in like the movies or on TV shows or even like within ourselves or someone we know. It can look like a child is just being aggressive and defiant when they're in the middle of a full-blown anxiety. And, if you want more information on this, I know it's quick. Feel free to reach out to Kara or I, or, your MHPs at your school. We're all happy to share resources and information as we can. So just a really quick trauma-informed care, refresher throwing in here. I know that throughout the organization, we're trying our best every single day to provide a trauma-informed environment. And, obviously the overall goal of this is promoting an environment of healing and recovery. The components we're looking for here are a safe environment, creating those healthy relationships and connectedness. And, this could be between staff and students, between, student to student, creating those relationships with parents and caregivers and families to help them, be a little bit more trauma informed if we're able to do that. And also supporting and teaching emotional regulation. And obviously as MHPs, we do, a lot of this, but we can't do it without all the hard work that the teachers do in their classroom, because you all are with these students a lot more than we are most of the time. We want to be maintaining an attitude of what happened rather than what's wrong with you. If we come into a situation with those, what's wrong with you, that type of attitude, it just creates defensiveness and the walls go up. When we come in with what happened and even just asking right away what happened, it brings down some of that defensiveness and allows some of that connection and trust to happen and feeling of safety to where a student may be able to de-escalate a little bit and work with us. And we like to talk here about our, Kara calls it upstairs, downstairs brain. I tend to call it more wizard and lizard brain, but it's the same thing. When we're in our downstairs or our lizard brain, we're back in those trauma responses with, our fight or flight or our freeze or our fawning or whatever we're prone to doing. And we're not in a place to make those rational and logical decisions in a calm way to help our students de-escalate. So we have to make sure that we're able to get into our upstairs or wizard brain in that frontal lobe where we can make those, rational, logical responses and be calm in a way that helps them create the calm that they need to de-escalate before we can really help them. So if you're not able to get into that space of your upstairs or wizard brain, being able to maybe reach out to somebody else and just, pull them in to help you, or just being able to identify, like, I'm not able to do this right now. And there's nothing wrong with that, needing to step away and get yourself in a place where you can deal with it. Because if everyone's escalated, nobody is becoming de-escalated. And if you're wanting more on trauma-informed care, there's lots of trainings out there. I know that the district offers training. From what I understand, the MHPs are going to be offering, trainings at each of our sites in the fall. And also, again, reach out to Kara and I if you want more information or resources. Okay. And so here we have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We wanted to include this because most people are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but not everybody knows really like what it is or, how it can be helpful in understanding populations such as the one we're talking about today. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a motivational theory in psychology made up of a 5-tiered model of human needs. And it goes from the bottom up. So those lower needs that you see at the bottom of the pyramid take precedence over the higher level needs. We have to have the bottom needs met before we can move up. So we start here with physiological safety, or just physiological needs, which is our basic needs for survival. So this is, our ability to breathe, where we have enough to eat, where we have enough to keep hydrated, being able to sleep, all of those things that keep us alive. Once those physiological needs are met, we can move up to our safety needs. And this is, security of our body, of, knowing that our family is going to be okay, that our health is okay, that overall sense that we are safe and everything is going to be okay. Once that's met, we move up into love and belonging, which is where our relationships and connectedness with other people come in. And this is our overall just sense that we belong and that we're not alone in life. Next comes esteem, which is where our self-esteem is. This is our sense of accomplishment, of mastery, where we gain our confidence and we can learn to respect ourselves and other people. After that is the very top level, which is self-actualization. And, this part is the overall process of growing and developing as a person in order to achieve our individual potential. This is where our morality comes in, our creativity, our ability to problem solve, accepting facts. And this is where we can start truly integrating and utilizing things that we're learning. Obviously, the population that we're talking about today, if we look at the trauma response slide, they are generally trying to create safety for themselves through their response with this defiance and aggression and all of that. So they are not up, in these upper levels where they are able to integrate and utilize the skills that we're teaching them. So we have to work to create that safety for them and try to help them achieve some of these needs that are being unmet, at least while they're at school, so that we can get them to these higher levels. And we wanted to point out here that this is fluid. Just because maybe you reach esteem or self-actualization doesn't mean you're going to stay there. The pandemic is a perfect just example of this because, even with most of us, being fully functioning adults who maybe sit more up in esteem and self-actualization, if we had maybe a spouse or a partner who lost their job or family members getting sick or were scared for our own health, that could knock us all the way down into safety and not be allowing us to fully function at our optimal level. So it's important to just, know where you are and understand where your kids are when you're working with them.
So next, we just wanted to talk about the importance of being proactive in these types of situations. So things like that include modeling behaviors and boundaries that we're expecting from our kids. So be thinking about, in the classroom setting, what behaviors do you promote and which do you tolerate? It's really important to remember that what we do and what we do tolerate in the classroom, we encourage to continue happening. We should also be thinking about our own internal biases. So what is it that you bring with you to the classroom? We should be working to set kids up for success with any small or manageable jobs to promote responsibility and kind of build that self-esteem up in order to provide opportunities for praise and responsibility. We should work with the student to be recognizing their triggers. So triggers can be known or they could be unknown to the students and for ourselves as well. So triggers that neither of us may know about could include some sort of olfactory trigger. The student may smell something and automatically kind of brings him or herself right back to that situation, which included a traumatic event. We shouldn't assume that we know necessarily what has triggered them. And it's okay and encouraged to ask the student once he or she has calmed down to kind of figure it out together. So you may kind of bring some ideas in and that's perfectly fine. But we really need to take the student's lead with this. We should definitely be remembering that the child does have a past that we may or may not be aware of, and they bring along their own defense mechanisms. So defense mechanisms may include things like pushing adults or caregivers away. So if that's been successful for them in the past, they're going to continue doing it and they might be actually really good at it. So we have to make sure that we're working hard to continue making those connections even when we're feeling pushed away. We should also be mindful of space and control and then planting seeds and modeling appropriate behavior whenever we can. So making sure that we're really letting go of our egos and remember that we're all doing our best, including and especially the kids in this situation. And our best is going to look different from day to day, and that is perfectly fine. So on our next slide, we are going to be talking about tips for working with defiant kids. First and foremost, we definitely want to acknowledge and validate the child's emotions. So he or she is likely not at the core trying to make things more difficult, but they may be feeling a loss of control or anxiety or a traumatic response of some sort, like Kelsey had alluded to earlier. We want to think about, again, what are they trying to communicate to you? So what is the function of that behavior? Somewhere along the line, that child has decided in a conscious or unconscious way that there is a payoff for this behavior. So what is in it for them and why? And again, kind of working to recognize those triggers together. We should also be mindful of any type of challenges as well as any changes in routine. So any changes in routine could include things like a substitute teacher coming in, having a fire drill, or any type of situation that's going to alter kind of what the day generally looks like. And if we know ahead of time that one of those situations are going to come up, like if you know you're going to be absent from school, giving those kids a heads up so that they have time to plan and prepare. Again, when possible, be proactive in recognizing and disrupting a child's anger and escalation cycle. So what that may look like is kind of stopping when you see some sort of physical change. So if you see the child's fist start to, ball up or their jaw kind of start to clench, making sure that we're talking to them in a calm and clear voice, providing reassurance to them, and also kind of giving them space when needed. So again, that child is going to kind of be giving you tips and cues that we need to be very mindful of and recognize as we get to know that student better. They might not want to be talked to at all, and by us talking or over talking, we may kind of only further escalate the situation. So we just really need to be careful of that. And again, positive reinforcement whenever possible. We need to make sure that we're doing that even when it's not necessarily convenient for us. So it doesn't mean just kind of letting the child do whatever he wants to, but really, really working to be intentional and purposeful in our interactions with those students. Our next slide is going to be kind of working through those defiant behaviors. So a lot of these may sound really obvious, but it's really important, especially during these types of escalated situations, that we do what we can in order to kind of keep ourselves on a level ground. So first and foremost, we want to avoid yelling and power struggles. We don't always have to be right. Right? I know it feels like that sometimes, but we want to make sure that we're giving that child the time and the space and the privacy that they deserve in working through their situation. So think about, as an adult, if you were in a meeting with your colleagues and a boss called you out in front of everybody, it would be really embarrassing, it'd be degrading, and we want to try to avoid that at all costs. We want to try to stay calm and set limits and parameters, but avoid trying to control too much, because oftentimes that can kind of cause the child to rebel further. We should, again, use a neutral and calm voice and avoid using any kind of sarcasm, because that can really, really be detrimental to your relationship with that child. We should be following through on identified consequences, and remember that positive consequences are just as important as negative ones. So remind the kids that of the control that they do have in that situation, of their choices, their behaviors, and their feelings, because those all work together in terms of the consequence, which is what they either are or are trying to avoid. Next, we're going to be talking about in responding to defiance. So be really mindful of any defense mechanisms, both within ourselves and the kids. So what are our cycles of behavior and responses? Those are going to impact the child greatly. So remember to kind of check in with yourself, kind of identify how you're feeling, and being aware of any negative thought patterns or cognitive distortions. It's It's really important to remember limitations on the kid's control. So within any given normal school day, and now even more so maybe, there are a lot of limits in terms of what the child's educational day looks like and how much they can control. So things like that might include when they can go to the bathroom, when they're able to socialize with their friends, things like that, how they can get their energy out and when. So we should be providing clear and concise choices, but making sure that whatever choices that we offer, they're going to be choices that we are going to be able to live with. We should avoid any type of punitive responses or trying to kind of get the child into trouble or punish him or her. And again, be sure to catch the student making positive choices and provide positive feedback. It's really important to catch these students doing good, and it might kind of make them a little bit surprised sometimes because they might not be used to it, but that just means they need it even more. Next, we're going to be talking about debriefing after defiance. So it's really important, again, these steps should be taken after the situation is calm and the child has indicated that he or she is ready to talk about this. We should be talking about and encouraging the child to identify his or her perception of the triggering event and their role in that event. So what was their response? Did they fuel calm or did they fuel kind of more of that chaos? What was our response or the other kid's response to their role in the incident? And then what do they want from others? Do they want us to be quiet? Do they want us to give them space? Do they want encouragement? And then how can we kind of get in the way to resolve a similar conflict in the future? Because we want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can in order to work with that child to promote success. Next, in looking forward, we want to be sure that we are preparing for challenges. So often a child's behavior is going to get worse before it gets better. It's important to stay consistent and really not get discouraged, even if, it's really frustrating. Keep going because it does not mean that you're failing. It just means this is part of the process. And then we should get family and other community or staff members on board to use the same language. We should be reminding students that while we don't approve of their behavior, we accept and we care about them. And then also taking care of ourselves. So in the next slide, we're going to be talking about different types of self-care. We wanted to list these out because a lot of times we think of kind of the general self-care kind of compartments, but it's important that we meet the emotional, practical, and professional, physical, mental, social, and spiritual aspects of self-care. Remember that it does differ for everyone, and it's important to understand our own triggers and cycles of behavior. We should be very intentional and proactive whenever we can so that we can get our own needs met in order to put our best selves forward in helping these kids. All right, and then lastly, we just wanted to take a look at those cognitive distortions that I kind of talked a little bit about earlier. So cognitive distortions are any negative thought patterns. They can be irrational, anything that really differs from reality. So we have a couple of examples here, but I just wanted to make sure to touch on personalization. That would be kind of taking something that somebody says or does and taking it personally as if their behavior is in relation to us at all times. This is something that's really important because oftentimes in working with kids like this, it can be hard and taxing, but we shouldn't take it personally. And we know that you all are doing the best that you can in the way that we are as well. And again, the kids are also. So the last slide is just a list of references that we wanted to share with you that we used for our presentation. Again, as Kelsey said earlier, feel free to click on one of these links. It's linked to our presentation on the website. And then we also wanted to share our emails with you as well. We're available for questions. If you need a clarification on anything, we will be very, very glad to help you out.